Florida averages 54 inches of rain every year, which is significantly more than Seattle or New York. Yet right now, 100% of the state is suffering from drought. The massive aquifer that 6 million people depend on for their daily drinking water is critically draining toward the ocean, leaving the entire region vulnerable to an unprecedented water catastrophe. Even the Everglades, recognized as the largest wetland system in the United States, have gone bone dry as the natural water flow that sustained this ecosystem for centuries simply vanished. A massive wildfire spanning 35,000 acres recently ripped through the Big Cypress National Preserve, creating so much smoke that authorities were forced to shut down the famous Alligator Alley. For the first time in their entire history, all 5 of Florida's water management districts issued severe water shortage warnings simultaneously, signaling a crisis that the state has never faced. While the brown lawns and empty canals are visible signs of trouble, there is a much deeper and more terrifying detail that reveals the real story of this environmental collapse. Imagine turning on your kitchen faucet in Miami-Dade County today. The water still looks perfectly clean and tastes normal, but beneath your house, the fundamental balance of nature is shifting. Deep under the streets, and a shallow layer of porous rock that separates your family from the vast Atlantic Ocean, a silent battle for the future of drinking water is beginning. The vital Biscayne Aquifer sits between 10 and 200 feet below the surface, in a bed of limestone that runs directly to the salt water of the rising sea. There is no solid wall separating our fresh water from the ocean, as the only thing holding the salt back is the constant outward pressure of the underground fresh water supply. Fresh water pushes east, while salt water pushes west. But every single week that passes without significant rain, the freshwater side loses ground in this invisible war beneath the Florida soil. The United States Geological Survey has already documented the saltwater front advancing inland across 24 square kilometers of Miami-Dade County, and that was even before this current drought started. No one has published an updated map since the crisis accelerated, and the dangerous dry season is not expected to end until the late weeks of May, leaving residents in suspense. This crisis did not begin with a single storm or a sudden disaster. Instead, it crept in slowly during the summer of 2025, when the rains failed to arrive. July and August are normally the rainiest months in South Florida, but during that critical period, the actual rainfall totals came in well below the historical average for the entire state. By late October, a vài túi nhỏ của tiểu bang đã tạm thời thoát khỏi hạn hán, nhưng sau đó mùa khô bắt đầu và sự thiếu hụt độ ẩm tăng tốc nhanh chóng. By February of 2026, the Palm Beach International Airport had received only 1.66 inches of rain since November, leaving a massive gap in water. The normal rainfall for that period is usually 10.6 inches, which means the region faced a staggering 85% shortfall that crippled the local ecosystem. Then came the moment that completely rewrote the math of this disaster on January 31st, when a brutal cold front rolled into South Florida and stayed. Record low temperatures were set for 4 consecutive days, causing citrus to freeze directly on the branch and turning vegetable fields across the Lake Okeechobee region black. Berry operations across the state began to collapse immediately, and nurseries lost their entire inventories as the freezing air destroyed months of hard work and financial investment. The Agriculture Commissioner estimated the total losses at up to $1 billion and was forced to suspend farm inspections across all 67 counties to manage this crisis. But the freeze did something even more dangerous than destroying crops. It killed the vast fields of vegetation across the Everglades and the Big Cypress National Preserve. Thousands of acres of sawgrass and thick brush were left dead and standing in place like dry kindling, waiting for a single spark to ignite a massive explosion. On February 23rd, that ignition finally occurred, and a terrifying wildfire consumed 25,000 acres of land in just 48 hours, overwhelming all local fire department resources. Alligator Alley was shut down overnight as visibility dropped to zero, trapping travelers and creating a chaotic scene of emergency lights flickering through the thick clouds of smoke. By March 18th, the fire had consumed exactly 35,027 acres, requiring 154 firefighters and 4 helicopters to battle the blaze. While the brown lawns and empty canals are what everyone can see, the real crisis remains invisible to the naked eye because it is happening beneath the soil. The Biscayne Aquifer covers more than 4,000 square miles beneath southeastern Florida and is composed of karst limestone, a rock riddled with countless holes and channels. This extreme permeability is what makes it one of the most productive aquifers in the world, but it also makes it the most dangerous to drain. The same channels that allow fresh water to flow so easily also allow salt water from the ocean to creep inland whenever the internal pressure drops significantly. When water levels drop, the pressure holding the massive ocean at bay weakens, allowing salt water to rise through fractures and seep from canals connecting to the coast. The ocean does not negotiate with the land. It simply finds every single crack in the limestone and pushes through with relentless force until the fresh water is contaminated. The United States Geological Survey has documented this process advancing steadily since the 1950s, when the population of Miami-Dade was still under 500,000. Today, the population has exploded to 2.7 million people, and every single one of them depends on this specific rock for the water they need. For thousands of years, the Everglades acted as a massive, slow-moving river of fresh water that flowed south from Lake Okeechobee across the entire southern tip of the Florida peninsula. This consistent sheet of water kept the vital aquifer completely full and pinned the saltwater front firmly to the coast, protecting the drinking water for all future human generations. Then, starting in the 1880s, ambitious engineers began the massive task of draining the Everglades to create profitable farmland and dry ground for the construction of modern coastal cities. They dug enormous canals to compartmentalize the natural flow, building massive levees and control structures that eventually severed the natural water supply that once refreshed the land to the south. Steve Davis, the chief scientist at the Everglades Foundation, explained that when we compartmentalized the ecosystem, we made it significantly more vulnerable to the devastating effects of extreme drought. The very system that once protected the aquifer was dismantled piece by piece to build the sprawling cities that now depend entirely on that same aquifer for their survival. But that was only half of the collision, because while the aquifer drains from above, the massive ocean is simultaneously rising from below with a force that cannot be stopped. Sea level along the South Florida coast has climbed roughly 8 inches in the last century, and scientific data shows that the rate of this rise is currently accelerating. Higher seas push the saltwater front further inland even during normal years, but in drought years, these two destructive forces converge to narrow the margin separating drinking water from contamination. Now we must widen the lens to see that this is not just a South Florida problem, as all 5 water management districts declared shortages simultaneously for the first time. In Tampa Bay, the Southwest Florida District imposed a modified Phase 2 severe water shortage, strictly limiting irrigation to only 1 single day per week for all residents. In Jacksonville, the St. Johns River District escalated to Phase 2 severe status across 8 different counties, forcing local authorities to reconsider their long-term water usage strategies and policies. In the Panhandle, the Northwest Florida District issued its water shortage warning for only the 3rd time in the agency's entire existence since the previous crisis in 2007. Stacy Greco, a water resources program manager in Alachua County, told residents to consider not irrigating their lawns at all to preserve the rapidly dwindling supply of fresh water. Extreme drought now covers roughly half of the entire state, and severe drought affects 87% of the land, while the dry season still has 2 full months left. The tally of destruction is already stark. 35,000 acres burned, $1 billion in crop losses recorded, and 5 district-wide shortage orders remain in full effect. Picture Marshall Jones standing in a field of dry sawgrass 30 miles south of Miami. He is a 5th-generation Everglades gladesman whose family has worked this land. He owns 7 airboats, but one of them currently sits on the dry bed of a canal, tilted on its side like a massive beached ship in the desert. The water that normally reaches his thigh is completely gone, and in just 32 days during the peak tourism season, he has lost roughly $50,000 in revenue. The fish in the remaining small water pockets are suffocating because there is not enough oxygen left in the stagnant water for them to breathe in the intense heat. Alligators crawl through the thick muck looking for deeper water that does not exist. While Jones says this drought has come on faster than any he has ever seen. 200 miles northwest in Cape Coral, 14,000 homes depend on the Mid-Hawthorne Aquifer for every single drop of water they use for their daily survival. The record low level for this aquifer is 93.91 feet, while the significant harm threshold sits dangerously at a level of negative 103 feet. Currently, the recharge rate is only 4 feet per year, which is a terrifying drop from the historical average of 13 to 15 feet recorded every single year. Mark Elner from the South Florida Water Management District explained that rapid growth over the past 2.5 decades is the primary driver for these declines. He simply noted that while the number of straws in the ground multiplied rapidly, the actual amount of water available in the aquifer did not increase at all. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Climate Prediction Center currently forecasts that this extreme drought will persist through at least the end of the month of April. The rainy season typically does not begin until late May, leaving many weeks of uncertainty for the 22 million people who call this beautiful southern state their home. Even when the rain finally arrives, it may not provide the relief we expect because the ground is so compacted from many months of intense and brutal dryness. Instead of soaking deep into the aquifer, heavy rainfall will likely run off the surface and flood the streets, leaving the underground water supply completely empty and vulnerable. Light and sustained rain over many weeks is the only thing that works to recharge the rock, yet that is precisely the kind of rain Florida almost never gets. If the Biscayne Aquifer drops any further, mandatory water restrictions could soon be imposed on over 6 million people living in Miami-Dade and the surrounding coastal counties. If saltwater contaminates the well fields, there is no quick fix available because you simply cannot flush salt out of the porous and complex limestone structures. Communities would have to wait for many years for freshwater pressure to rebuild and push the heavy salt back toward the dark depths of the Atlantic Ocean. If a major hurricane arrives this summer, the powerful storm surge could drive saltwater even deeper inland, accelerating the permanent contamination that this drought set in motion. The very thing that is supposed to bring us relief, a massive tropical storm, could actually make the environmental damage to our drinking water permanent and irreversible. Florida averages 54 inches of rain in a normal year, but right now, beneath the feet of 22 million people, the fresh water is losing its battle. The limestone remains dangerously porous, the ocean continues its steady rise, and the saltwater front is still advancing through rock that absolutely no one is currently measuring. Every single day, thousands of new residents move to Florida seeking sunshine, completely unaware that the very foundation of their new life is slowly dissolving into salt beneath them. Experts warn that the current infrastructure was never designed to handle the combined pressure of 22 million people and a rapidly rising, aggressive Atlantic Ocean that refuses to retreat. If we do not change how we manage our precious water resources immediately, the vibrant coastal paradise we know today could become a ghost town of salt and dust. The economic cost of building enough desalination plants to replace the Biscayne Aquifer is estimated to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars, a price no one can pay. Local governments are now facing an impossible choice between funding massive engineering projects or watching their property tax base literally wash away as the fresh water disappears into the sea. This is the silent enemy that no politician wants to talk about because there is no easy solution that fits into a simple 4-year election cycle for the anxious public. For the fifth-generation families like the Joneses, the loss of the Everglades is not just a financial disaster, but the death of a culture that defined the soul of Florida. We are currently witnessing a slow-motion collision between human greed, historical engineering mistakes, and the relentless reality of a changing global climate that will wait for no single person. The limestone beneath Miami remains as porous as a sponge, and every gallon of fresh water we pump out is an open invitation for the ocean to move further inland. Future generations will look back at this moment and wonder why we ignored the warnings that were written in the dry grass and the salty taste of our own faucets. The dry season of 2026 may eventually end with the arrival of summer rains, but the underlying damage to the Biscayne Aquifer might already be permanent and catastrophic. We are running out of time to restore the natural flow of the Everglades and rebuild the freshwater pressure that is the only thing standing between us and disaster. As the saltwater front continues its invisible march through the rock, we must ask ourselves if we are truly ready to lose the water that keeps Florida alive. Florida is a land built on water, but without the balance provided by nature, it is nothing more than a fragile sandbar waiting for the ocean to reclaim its territory. The limestone is still porous, the sea level is still rising, and the water that once felt infinite is proving to be the most finite resource we have ever owned. We have reached the point where we can no longer afford to ignore the silent war happening beneath our feet, for the ocean does not negotiate and it never sleeps. This is not just a warning about a drought. It is a final call to protect the very essence of life before the salt takes everything we have ever built. In the end, the history of Florida will be written not in gold or sun, but in the memory of the fresh water that we failed to keep for ourselves. Look at the state of Florida as a whole, where over 87% of the land is now struggling under the weight of a severe and unrelenting water shortage today. The dry season has exactly 2 full months left to run, which means that the current deficit of rainfall will likely continue to accelerate through the late weeks of May. Local authorities in the Northwest Florida district have issued severe warnings for only the 3rd time in history, proving that even the wettest regions are now starting to fail. In Alachua County, officials like Stacy Greco are pleading with residents to completely stop irrigating their lawns to preserve whatever tiny amount of fresh water still remains in the ground. We must realize that every single gallon of water pumped out during this crisis weakens the underground pressure that is currently holding the entire Atlantic Ocean at a dangerous bay. If the pressure drops too low, the saltwater front will advance through the porous limestone, a process that has already swallowed 24 square kilometers of land in Miami-Dade County. This is not a slow disaster that will happen in the distant future, but a rapid collapse that is being documented by the United States Geological Survey right this second. When saltwater finally enters the deep well fields, it ruins the rock forever, because there is no mechanical way to flush the salt out of the complex karst limestone. Communities would be forced to wait for many decades for natural pressure to rebuild, leaving 6 million people in South Florida without a reliable source of clean drinking water. Even a single tropical storm could drive a massive surge of salt water deep inland, making the contamination permanent before the summer rains have a chance to soak the soil. The truth is that we have dismantled the natural systems of the Everglades to build modern cities that simply cannot survive without the very water we have drained away forever. With 22 million people now standing on top of this fragile rock, the battle for Florida's survival is being lost beneath our feet in a war we never meant to fight. The ocean does not negotiate with the land, it simply finds the cracks and pushes through until the fresh water that keeps this entire state alive is completely gone from existence. We must decide now if we will restore the flow of the Everglades, or watch as the saltwater front claims the final fragments of our once bountiful underground water supply. Florida has always averaged 54 inches of rain, yet we are currently drowning in a drought that is invisible, silent, and potentially impossible for any human engineering to ever fix. The porous limestone is still there, the ocean is still rising, and the water is still disappearing, while the world watches a tragedy that is currently being ignored by the headlines. This is the real story of Florida, a land where the water is losing its battle to stay pure, while a thirsty civilization continues to multiply its demands on the earth.